Yes, you've missed it, Space Monkeys, but we are back. Freelancing has returned. I've remembered that I have a YouTube channel and that occasionally I do have to post content onto it. I am BlueHighwind. You are my Space Monkeys. This is Freelancing, a series where I talk into a microphone. Now a brand new, spanking, fancy new microphone versus the old one, which was a $30 plastic piece of crap that I found at a Best Buy. This one actually is slightly more advanced, still costs $30. However, it's kind of like a hand mic, so more advanced. It has a stand and everything. So I got like a brand new setup. I feel like an actual recording person, you know, like real radio people. Somebody who actually knows what they're doing instead of somebody who just sort of rambles on a semi-weekly basis. So, this week, the subject is a new movie that was released, I think, last Friday. It depends on what market you're in. But movies, as you know, come out at certain places at certain times. I live in New Jersey, so we get actually a very large selection. There's a very large Indian population here, so New Jersey actually gets a huge amount of really obscure Indian movies, which one of these days I'd like to go see, but I almost never do. We have Korean movies, we got indie movies, we got lots of stuff. It just takes us a few weeks for it to trickle out of Manhattan, if it does at all. And if it doesn't, there's always torrents. So there you go. Anyway, the movie that came out is not a foreign film, but it is a somewhat unusual film. It's not in the Hollywood mainstream. However, it's not a good movie. It is America. What Would the World Be Like Without Her? By Dinesh D'Souza. Now, if you have no idea who Dinesh D'Souza is, and really, who can blame you if you're not a Tea Partier or right-wing Republican or crazy left-winger who obsesses about politics all the time. Dinesh D'Souza is an American Indian Republican loudmouth. That's just what he says. He's a pundit, and he makes movies. Loudmouth is kind of a bad word. He's somewhat more respectful than, say, just an idiot blackguard like Sean Hannity, you know, just somebody who's just there to drum up controversy constantly. And Ann Coulter is just a bitch 24/7. Dinesh D'Souza, I guess more respectfully, is somebody who's trying to make a point, but not a very good one. It's not very well thought out. He's still just kind of drumming up the troops with his propaganda films, which is what they are. They're propaganda films. So his last movie was 2016 Obama's America, which was a dark tale of what would happen if Obama won the 2012 election. And he was very quick to point out in the movie itself that was actually the second most successful political documentary of all time, which sounds impressive when you realize just how narrow those margins possibly are. I'm suspecting number one is An Inconvenient Truth, but then again, I don't know what the exact definition of political documentary is. Number one possibly could be Triumph of the Will. I'm not sure. Anyway, so Dinesh D'Souza made that movie, and despite it, Obama won in 2012 because the Republicans went and put a pale, smug, not very effective man. And does anyone even remember his name, who the Republicans ran in 2012? His name was Mitt Romney. A wonderful little minor footnote in history. But yeah, if they had run somebody important, maybe the dark future of Obama's America might not have happened. Maybe we could have an effective government instead of just kind of 4 years of nothing happening. But, you know, the boring truth of simply incompetence is not really enough for Republicans and not really enough for Democrats either, let's be honest. So you gotta make villains out of everybody, and Dinesh D'Souza looks at looks at the Democrats as the archenemy. Well, I guess. Again, he's slightly more respectful with it, and America, the movie, is kind of a attempt, at least, at a smart, historical viewpoint. The only problem is he never actually bothered to come up with a thesis, or an argument, or really any kind of point. The whole movie is, well, it's based on a book, first of all, which I suspect, or at least hope, has more substance to it and had a general concept and idea and didn't sort of ramble around. But the movie itself, it opens up by asking a startling question. What would have happened if General George Washington, in this middle of this truly just embarrassingly shameless bit of pageantry of him walking down the field and little drummers and slow motion, the filmmaking in this movie is so cornball and just, it's so like classic 4th of July, let's all get out and get on the fields in our silly costumes, and it's almost like, you almost gotta like kind of love it, but on the other hand, you look at it, you just gotta kind of be ashamed, because it's like, come on guys, this is so over the top, and they don't mean to be over the top. This is like, they're playing all of this straight, they really believe in all this shit. So they imagine what would have happened if George Washington had been shot by a British sniper during the Battle of... Actually, they don't specify what battle. I think it's New Brunswick. Some battle in New Jersey, I suspect. Cut out the coughing. Anyway, so they imagine what would have happened if George Washington had been shot. And the answer would have been is that the Continental Congress would have appointed a new general who would have taken over. Might have been more successful, might have been less successful, and the war would have continued as was, because ultimately, George Washington, despite being the face and the symbol of the American Revolution, really wasn't that essential. His main role was just kind of tying up British forces in the mid-Atlantic states, while the real battles and real victories were won in the South and in upstate New York. The decisive victories George Washington didn't really have anything to do with until Yorktown, when the victory was basically handed on him on a platter by the French and the massive incompetence of Cornwallis. Anyway, as you might know, I am a history major, so I actually study this sort of stuff. I'm not like a specifier, whatever, in American Revolution. I haven't read any major books or whatever, but I do kind of follow this sort of thing. So, if George Washington had died, I don't know, I don't think it would have been the turning point of the war. Honestly, if, let's say Benedict Arnold had been shot before the Battle of Saratoga, that might have been bad. We could have lost then. But who cares? Nobody cares. Anyway, Dinesh D'Souza, in one of the first of many examples of him not actually doing the historical research, or doing the research in a very selective manner, just assumes that at this point America would have been completely wiped out, and then his opening montage is a series of very, very badly done CG scenes of American landmarks disappearing and fading into nothingness. And then he starts asking other questions like, what if we had lost the Civil War? What if the Nazis had invented the nuclear bomb? And actually the answer, if the Nazis had invented the nuclear bomb, probably nothing. London might have been destroyed, but we still would have won. Hitler really didn't have a chance in that war. But, first of all, those scenes were really bad looking, but let's kind of ignore the filmmaking and follow more the argument. And I was thinking at this point, because I didn't really come into this movie knowing very much. I didn't know who Dinesh D'Souza was, and I didn't really know what the point of this movie was, other than the AV Club had given it a very rarely used F. The AV Club, they rate a lot of movies. They rate a lot of TV shows, and I've only seen them give an F to, like, 2 things. One of those being the finale to Dexter, which apparently was just abominably bad, and the other one being this. So, F is a rare thing to see, and if they throw an F out, that's a really low mark, and I'm like, alright, I gotta see it, fine. Because they didn't give an F to other bad, truly awful movies this year. Vampire Academy, I think, got like a C-. God's Not Dead, that might have gotten a D-, I don't know, but like, seriously, an F? Alright, I'm there, fine. So, having set up this counterfactual of what would the world be like if America doesn't exist, Dinesh D'Souza then proceeds to completely ignore it, and thus making the title for his movie completely meaningless. At no point does he ever even consider the question of what history would have been like without America. Because it is a very difficult question to ask. I mean, it would make a kind of weird sci-fi novel, I guess. But there you are. He doesn't have it. He didn't even bother. So now we move on to the first of two other completely different ideas, ignoring the title, which is a long attack on basically all history research of the last 50 years. So Dinesh D'Souza has a particular dislike for what he considers the victimization of the United States. He doesn't like people like Howard Zinn. Man, I'm just so full of like gunk in my mouth. I gotta cut all this shit. But he doesn't like people like Howard Zinn, who was the author of the famed history book, The People's History of the United States, which is probably the most important research or historical book of American history written in the last 50 years. Embarrassingly, despite being a history major myself, and having actually taken courses in this exact subject of American imperialism, I've never actually read A People's History of the United States. For whatever reason, that was never in any of my curriculums. I want to read it one day, but I haven't read the book, so that kind of means I shouldn't be the one refuting Dinesh D'Souza, I guess. But the movie is about refuting Howard Zinn, and at this point, he labels 5 arguments against the United States. This is Dinesh D'Souza is labeling 5 arguments against the United States, 4 of which are crimes that the U.S. has committed, and 1 being capitalism, which isn't really a historical crime and shouldn't really be included with the other 4, but he does anyway. So, his 4 arguments are the destruction of the Indians, the conquest of Mexican land, the slavery of African Americans and subsequent segregation, and 4th being imperialism abroad. One of which being an extremely broad subject. And I'd also like to point out that he missed Japanese internment and the conquest of Hawaii. And there are plenty of other examples of America behaving very badly that he missed and doesn't really subject on. His talk about imperialism particularly is very bad because his only list that he even begins to offer of American actions abroad are ones listed by Noam Chomsky of all people, who very early in this movie, they kind of tease, oh my god, Dinesh D'Souza is gonna debate Noam Chomsky. Which at this point I'm like, oh dear. I'm like, on one hand, I kind of feel bad for Noam Chomsky because he's like 90 years old and he's one of the greatest linguists. He's one of the greatest academics to live at this point. And he really has better things to do than go and fight with some Republican rabble-rouser. There's a man who at one point was hanging with Mikhail Foucault. Like, he's a really big, important figure, godlike. He will continue to exist. Dinesh D'Souza will be forgotten in 5 years, most likely. And you know, like, I'm just imagining, like, oh, he doesn't deserve this. But on the other hand, I'm imagining, like, Noam Chomsky just, like, crushing him to the ground. Because he's actually done the research and he knows what he's talking about. But we don't actually get to see that debate. Noam Chomsky disappears. But thankfully, he does give a list of interventions the United States has done. Philippines, Guatemala, Iran, Chile, Panama, the usual list. If you've studied this thing, we have a very bad history abroad. It's not very pretty. Dinesh D'Souza in this movie at no point comments on any of them. And personally, I was looking forward to the point where he defended the United Fruit Company and says that our coup in Guatemala was completely justified. I was waiting for that, but he never comments on it. It's very disappointing. So really, the next phase of the movie is just him giving a very broad and very weak history of the United States with a few very weak excuses for things that we've done. For example, the Indian thing, well, we conquered the Native Americans. And we did. We have conquered an entire continent. And there's really no looking around it. We did it. It's something that we've done. We took their land. It's right by right of conquest. We did it. One of his excuses is, 1, we don't need to go and consider Columbus, because that was one of the big deals in A People's History of the United States, is going and refuting the myth of Columbus as this heroic figure, when really Columbus was one hell of a dick, and very nasty, and unlikable even by the Spanish. But that's unimportant. Dinesh D'Souza's excuse is, oh, well, we don't need to go and defend Columbus, because Columbus was an American. He didn't even come to the United States. What, are we going to go and take up the sins of the Spanish? And he's ultimately missing the point of why Columbus is centered in all these American imperialism discussions, because Columbus is an American hero, or he was an American hero until Howard Zinn. That's why we had Columbus Day parades. That's why, if you were in grammar school, I know when I was in grammar school, we had Columbus coloring books and little happy cartoon books where Columbus would hang with a parrot who led him to the New World. And, oh, isn't this wonderful? You found America just as your dream. Oh my God, there's a lot of myths there. You proved the earth was flat. Was it flat? Oh, and, missing the point of the slavery and the rape and the conquest and the destruction and the horror. But, Dinesh D'Souza just says, oh, we don't have to go and care about Columbus. That's not us. That wasn't America. Which I guess is okay. I mean, hey, it wasn't America's fault that Columbus did it. It's part of our founding myth. We can just safely take it away. But that's why Howard Zinn put it in. It was part of refuting the founding myth. Going back further, what Dinesh D'Souza doesn't seem to realize is that before 1970, before people like Howard Zinn, and before, more importantly, the Vietnam War, America had a myth. There was a story. It was the story of proud white settlers coming out of Europe, escaping the chains of bondage and, kings and nobility, and stepping out onto the wild plains, the untamed wilderness, and building cities upon a hill, and pillaging and ripping out sod, and building fantastic farms, and creating the greatest empire that had ever lived. Well, not empire, the greatest country that ever lived. A shining beacon that will save the planet. And of course, notably the story being white people. White, middle-class Americans. That was who this country was for. Wasn't for African Americans, wasn't for the Mexicans, wasn't for the Native Americans, and sometimes wasn't even for the Jews. So, that's the story right there. It wasn't, and for a long time, it wasn't for the Irish, Italians, and people who weren't Anglo-Saxon. So, let's forget that. So, Dinesh D'Souza, he's coming at the end of the story. He's kind of fighting people who are fighting last year's war. Because Howard Zinn was going refuting the grand founding myth of America, which is that we were completely blameless and pure, and we were built on this world, and we could never do any wrong. And what he was doing is that when the Vietnam War happened, people were horrified that the United States could be behaving in this way. It was incomprehensible to them that we would go and start this huge, ridiculous, pointless war in Vietnam over nothing. And his argument was, no, we've been doing this from the beginning. We've always been an empire. We've always been taking. And that's how America's been made. I mean, partially we've been taking. I don't fully agree with the notion of America being an empire. I think we're a little better than that. We're technically an empire, I say, but we also contribute greatly to the world. I'm kind of in the middle here. Dinesh D'Souza looks at it as, this is how you discredit America. He also says this is what Obama believes, which is a stretch. I would rather doubt that a man who wanted to become the leader of a nation would hate it, but I don't know. You gotta unravel a lot of psychology here, with demanding that Obama get reprieved, and there's some mild talk of Hillary Clinton being possibly the Antichrist in this movie. It's a little hidden in a few messages, but any Republicans or right-wing Christians who are looking at this, they'd go and be able to pull it out, and I'm able to pull it out as well. It's not in there, but it is coded in there. Anyway, back to the 4 points. So the Indians, another thing he says is, oh, most of them were killed by plagues that the Europeans happened to bring over. Which again, it wasn't really the Europeans' fault. When the Spanish came around and smallpox ravaged Mexico, I can't imagine that it was something the Spanish did intentionally, and if they could have stopped it, they probably could have. It was a demographic nightmare of which that they had never really experienced, and they had distant memories of the Black Plague, but it wasn't anything that they could control then. It wasn't anything they understood then. It wasn't anything they understood now. Plagues in history, that's not something that's been understood until decades ago. Anyway, so Dinesh D'Souza, another argument he makes is that oh, we didn't actually conquer the Indians. I mean, well, it was kind of bad that we conquered the Black Hills from the Sioux and then dug the faces of our founding fathers onto the mountain. But, oh, well, the Sioux, they conquered it from the Cheyenne. It's, oh, that's another thing. There's a lot of moral relativism in his arguments. It's like, well, it kind of sucks that we conquered that land, but you gotta realize the Sioux, they were conquering people too. And, like, this only moments after he bold-facedly claims, oh, the United States, we're not a conquering power. That's not what we do. And to be fair, I will say Dinesh D'Souza gets one thing right. He does say that the United States is special. We introduced something new to the world, which is building wealth by mercantilism, by capitalism, by developing, which is kind of a stretch, because people have been developing and creating and building enterprises since the beginning of time, since somebody started plowing a field. But the United States is one country that specifically codified it. It's how we developed our upper class, is the ones who contribute the most, who build the most, who develop the most wealth. In other countries, it's always been the conquerors. That's how societies were developed. The guys with the most strength, the ones with the biggest swords, they were the ones who would take over things. European nobility began in the Dark Ages basically with mafias. You would just have a bunch of strongmen, they'd walk into a town and they'd be like, well, this town's mine. And people would follow them because if you didn't follow them, some other band would go and kill all of you. So that's how that's how social stratagems came along. And the United States has no social strategy, or at least the theory is that we don't have any social divisions. And the theory is that all men are created equal, but we've never actually lived up to that theory. We've been there, we've represented these things. We went and we create this truly fantastic document, the Declaration of Independence, which has inspired people for centuries, probably one of the most important political treatises of the last 500 years, or the most important one, because every revolutionary group, they looked to Jefferson, like, this is what we should follow. Ho Chi Minh was a big fan of Thomas Jefferson, even while we were bombing his capital city. Just so you understand, the United States is not blameless, but we do good things. There is a ideal that we have not been completely forward to. The ideal is not wrong. It's not that Howard Zinn doesn't believe in the ideal, or maybe he doesn't. I don't know. I don't know him personally. It's something that's great, but it's something that we haven't lived up to. And that's what these historians have been saying. That's what Dinesh D'Souza doesn't understand. He thinks that we have lived up to the ideal when we haven't. And let me just ignore the Mexican issue entirely, because for one, it was I don't know why he put that in our top 4. Because there's not really that much tension over stolen Mexican provinces. The last time that was politically relevant was in 1917 when we went to war with Germany because they wanted to bring that back. And Mexico didn't want anything to do with that. They were in the middle of a civil war. They weren't thinking of doubling their territory at that time. So he goes and he brings this up and he's like, well, the Mexicans over our border, they don't mind. They didn't mind getting taken over. Well, the ones we allowed to stay, the ones that we didn't kick out, which we did. We did that a lot. We've been kicking out Mexican ethnic groups from our country since I think the last major one was in the 1950s. There was an Operation Bootstrap when we just pulled everybody that we thought might have been illegal, even American citizens, just kicked them into Mexico. And actually, just to be 100%, let me double check that. Oh, sorry, I got that wrong. Operation Bootstrap was a ill-conceived development program in Puerto Rico. The actual name of the operation, which I was looking up, which I just realized I had wrong, that was called Operation, and forgive me for saying this is the name of the operation. It was Operation Wetback. Yeah, in 1954, we had an operation called Operation Wetback, and we kicked out illegal immigrants and their U.S.-born children who were citizens. Under the 14th Amendment, we kicked them into Mexico. And that's something that really happened. And you see now, it's not all pretty. There are bad moments. So let's move on to, say, the African-American issue. A few weak arguments that Dinesh D'Souza throws away against it is, oh, well, Africans kept slaves too. They're the ones that sold them to us. Hey, yeah, great. Another one is, oh, you know what? There were black slave owners in the South as well, which is true. That actually is something that happened. But one of my favorite bits, though, this is one of my favorite bits of filmmaking, because the filmmaking in this movie is so, like, History Channel documentary and amateurish. But one of my favorites is they got this, like, elderly gentleman who's basically, his filming is like, alright, you're gonna be the master here on this plantation, which must have been unusual for this actor to have to do, considering he is an African-American man. But anyway, he's gonna go and play this role, so he just kind of sits on a rocking chair, and he has a large cup of iced tea, sweating in the hot southern sun, and he's eating sugar cookies. And they cut back to this very same shot, and he's got this huge plate of sugar cookies. You just get the idea that this guy's just, all he's gonna do in his afternoons is he's gonna sit, he's gonna watch his slaves work in the field, and he's gonna eat a big, big, big plate of sugar cookies. He's gonna eat all the sugar cookies, because they haven't filmed him doing anything else. So I'm just imagining that the filming is just like, oh, alright, sir, just sit here, what can you do? Here, eat sugar cookies. Just do that. Look really greedy while you do it too. Also indentured servitude, because he's saying that we basically enslaved white people. So it's like, alright, we were dicks to black people, we were dicks to white people too. And as for segregation and later issues, well, there was this one black lady who I looked up who became a millionaire in the early 1900s. Isn't that fantastic? So we weren't bad to everybody. One black woman became a millionaire. Look at that. And, I'm imagining, like I see in this movie, this woman in this ridiculous pageantry, and she's in a old-timey car. And then I'm looking like, are they gonna go and film the lynchings? Which is what actually happened? Because, in 1920 in Duluth, Wisconsin, no, Minnesota. I think it's Minnesota. Yeah, Duluth, Minnesota? Whatever the town wherever that is, in Duluth, basically right on the Canada border, there were hangings. And you could buy postcards of those things. Dinesh D'Souza doesn't really mention that. People were proud of hanging uppity African Americans. They were proud of this. These were major moments. These were fairs. Murdering people. Again, it's not all pleasant. We are improving. It's a moment. It's an ideal. That's what the United States is. The idea is to get closer to it. It's to accept fault, that we've done bad things. Dinesh D'Souza's thing is, he sees this limited bit of criticism of the United States as, we just hate America. We don't exist. We don't want to be in America. We have quasi-socialist anarchist plans to go and remake America, make everyone guilty. And I'm gonna label myself a Howard Zinn. Why not? I'll be on his camp. Just so I can be against Dinesh D'Souza, because this is ridiculous. And it kind of made me mad. I'm sitting here and I'm like, this is awful. Where is this real research? At one point he brings out some guy who's like, oh, Howard Zinn's methodology was just terrible. He's got all these huge mistakes. And I'm like, alright, well, lay him out. I'm here. I'm sitting in the movie. Come on, go in. Pull out where his research is bad, because like any good history book, at the end there's a index of sources and a bibliography, and he's got special credits. And the People's History of the United States has been rewritten like 20 times. There's been many, many editions. So, if you see a problem in the methodology, just go and tell me, what is it? It's time. Let's have a real, this could be one of the best movies of the year as a history major. It could be like, oh, we're gonna have a hardcore history debate in a movie. Real intellectual stuff. We're gonna pull out sources. We're gonna argue methodology. We're just gonna go full on nerd here. We're gonna leave the audience in the dust. They won't care anymore. Unfortunately, they don't do that. So, it's all kind of bad pageantry and a dude with really funny hair dressed as Frederick Douglass, which was hilarious. The guy they have dressed as Frederick Douglass was, oh man, that was gold right there. That's almost worth the price of admission, because, on the one hand, he's a fully fly motherfucker, but on the other hand, this poor Frederick Douglass does not deserve to look like a Halloween costume. On the other hand, the guy they have playing, Alexis de Tocqueville, he looked really great in that costume. That man should never dress in modern clothing again. He should just be Alexis de Tocqueville forever. Let's go with that. Anyway, where was I? Did I refute all four? Oh yes, imperialism. His arguments against imperialism are, well, in Vietnam, we meant well. He goes and he talks to a veteran who survived the Hanoi Hilton, which, not that I don't have respect for this man and what he did in the name of the United States. And not that I don't think North Vietnam was being awful to our POWs, and that Ho Chi Minh did not do terrible things in the name of his country, just as we did terrible things in the name of ours. Vietnam was a bullshit war, and we were doing it for the worst reasons, and South Vietnam was basically a construct. It was not something we should have been fighting over. All the poor South Vietnamese that got kicked out by the conquering Vietnamese, that wasn't very nice either. But you see, history is always these moral gray shades, and going and assigning black and white at any point, it's not something you really want to do. It's kind of the worst way of history, and Dinesh going and just saying, oh, well, America's black because we criticize a little bit. Not really. It's not black and white. You always have to accept the moralism of the time. And if you're going to be a real historian, you just have to kind of let go of your modern assessments. Because really, if you're going to read old history, there's going to be a lot of raping, there's going to be a lot of pillaging, there's going to be a lot of sacking. And if you're not going to get down for it, you might as well just not read the story, because it's going to be very depressing for you. That's just how things were. Same thing with Vietnam. I think it's been like 50 years. No, not 50. It's been about 40 years, 50 years from the beginning. We can start to look at it more objectively, and I think we can all accept that Vietnam was for the wrong reasons. And just going and saying, well, we had men who thought they were doing well, who thought we were doing the right thing, isn't really the best answer. And again, completely ignores all of our other just obviously evil actions that we've done. Evil, there we go. I used the word evil. I went and I contradicted myself right there. But, you can go and say there were heroes in the United States when it came to Vietnam, men who were really trying to do their best. But then you have things like Guatemala, where if any American who had anything to do with that coup thought he was doing anything other than just conquering for conquering's sake, just to dominate Latin America, they had their head completely up their ass. And they did. If John Foster Dulles, if he thought, John Foster Dulles had to know what kind of a dick he was when it came to Guatemala. And yeah, that was not good. He doesn't mention Guatemala. He doesn't mention Iran. He does mention the Iraq War, where he says, oh, the war wasn't over oil, going and just refuting a very, very old, equally as terrible liberal critique of the war. Which, by the way, Michael Moore shows up a lot in this movie, and let me say, I'm not picking on Dinesh D'Souza just because I'm not of his political spectrum. Michael Moore, fuck you. Well, alright, I'm not gonna be that hardcore on you, Michael Moore, but you are just as bad as Dinesh D'Souza, if not worse. I liked Bowling for Columbine. I haven't liked anything you've done since. Fahrenheit 494, 451, Fahrenheit 9/11, that was garbage. Maybe, you know what, that's gotta be number one. That's gotta be the number one political documentary, Fahrenheit 9/11. Now that I think about it. By the way, just for clarity's sake, America, what would the world be like without her, is 10 times more honest and relevant and meaningful than Fahrenheit 9/11. There's no claims that we went to war in Afghanistan for a pipeline, that sort of thing. Anyway, where was I? Oh, alright, so that's the 4 weak arguments he makes to say that America's always been good, and what we've done wrong, though it was kind of wrong, it wasn't that wrong. Like, even his argument is kind of like all over the place. It's like, well, it was sucky, but like, you gotta think of it this way. It wasn't that bad. We didn't mean to be bad. Like, it's crap. It's crap. It's just crap. Anyway, let's leave on to capitalism. which is his way of refuting Occupy Wall Street, which is when he's going and saying, well, Occupy Wall Street is anti-capitalist. Every liberals hate capitalism, which is like, okay, there are people who hate capitalism. And if you're checking around Howard Zinn and his ilk, that generation of historians, a lot of them were socialists and communists and anarchists or crazy postmodernists who I've actually read some very bad history books about America being an imperial evil power written by some very butthurt communist professors after the end of the Cold War. It's like, oh, the whole world's going to be over because America's taken over now. Yeah, that's actually, this movie was way better than reading those kind of books. That book, I wish I could remember the name of it now, because, God, that was so badly written. That was one of the worst pieces of shit I think I've ever read. I'm not even going to tell you. You know what? Let's just ignore it. Let's just say it was a thing that happened. It's a thing that exists, but you don't want to read it, and I don't want to make it any more popular than it possibly is. I don't want to convince anyone to go out and find this thing. Just so, like, it's almost worth reading just so you can go and jot down just the most ridiculous turns of phrases of postmodernist crap. But let's forget that. Anyway, first of all, the current arguments of Occupy Wall Street and I guess, yeah, why not? Let's just call it wealth redistribution, is not against capitalism. Capitalism, or, well, I'll say why I kind of support these kind of things. I can't speak for everybody, but I'll go and speak for myself. Capitalism is the only system that we've ever devised that could be able to go and run an economy effectively. It's chaotic, but it's what works. There were grand plans, and we can go and regulate the economy. We can make it work better for everybody. That was called communism, and it failed. It was a disaster. It didn't work for anybody. It was impossible. It's chaos theory. It's like trying to predict the weather. You actually can't predict the weather, and you can't run an economy. Maybe if you get some sort of ridiculous supercomputer, you can do it one day. But if anything, the economy is only getting more and more chaotic as we go along. So, the problem with current American capitalism is not that it's capitalist, it's that the wealth is being redistributed. The wealth is going someplace. It is moving in a direction. And it's moving out of our pockets, middle America's pockets, the middle class's pockets. The American middle class has never been poorer. We have more stuff. Technology and innovation has made it so that it's like, oh, we're not really that poor, but we are poorer. My grandma, I remember I was speaking with her, I actually calculated this. Her summer job, part-time job, if she worked for 3 months, she could have bought a Mustang on that money. Because that's how cheap cars were. Actually, I don't think Mustangs existed at that point, but she could have bought a car on that money. Mustang's going a little bit far. She could have bought a car for a summer's bit of work in high school. Today, if you work in a summer job flipping burgers, what you get is nothing. $70,000 a year, which is, I guess, a nice livable wage, is fine. $30,000 a year is you're barely keeping up above headwater. And I don't even know if you could raise a family on that. And if you're below the poverty line, you are completely boned. But there are people making millions and millions of dollars, and power to them. A lot of them are really great innovators or people who just happen to be the heads of major innovation companies. Power to the Bill Gates of the world, and, way to go. You did great things. You've changed the world. You are heroes. But there are people who just kind of inherited it, or people who may not have deserved it, or dicks on Wall Street who have fucked over everyone else. So, why not protest it? And meanwhile, Dinesh is going and making a high school argument for capitalism, where he's like, he has this very terribly ill-conceived comedy section, where it's like, oh, well, let me show you how, if I go and make the burger for you, it's better for you. So, if you have a manufacturer of burgers, everyone should buy there, and this is why capitalism works. And it's like, this extremely childish way of like, this is why capitalism works. It's like, You're missing the point. It's not, yeah, theoretical capitalism is fantastic, but we don't really have capitalism in this country, not entirely. We have a bit of socialism where it's regulated towards people, but there's also where it's socialized towards rich people. And that's why it's not that great. And I'm not here going and saying, well, oh, I can't get a great job. I don't have a house. I don't have a hot chick on my lap right now giving me head while I go and I tell this story to basically nobody. I'm not telling that because rich people did it. I have every opportunity in the world to succeed. But there are people who don't. There are people who are angry, who have been fucked up from the beginning, who can't succeed. America is not equal right now. And it goes all the way back to schools. I'm getting way political now, but like, I'm gonna go on a rant just for a second. Why not? There are high schools in this country which have no funding because the cities around them, say Detroit, have been completely screwed over by, what else? Capitalism. And very, very badly done attempts to modernize them in the 1950s. Urban development was a disaster, but I'll stay way away from that. So anyway, they have terrible schools. What hope is there? You go to a school that is a crumbling wreck from overworked teachers who get no money, who don't really care about you. And even worse, there are schools where they're actually terrified of their students because they're African American teenagers and they're scary, I guess. This is why I wouldn't work in one of those schools, by the way. I know. It's hard, but this is how the system's set up. There are people who can go to schools where they are committed and they're encouraged and they're allowed to succeed. And there are kids who come in where they're immediately threatened by everywhere they go. It's basically preparing them for prison, and that's where they end up. Meanwhile, Dinesh kind of makes very vaguely an argument that, oh, it's the victimization mentality that keeps people poor. It's not actual structures in society, which is partially true and also not true. There are people who could succeed if we had things set up, and there are people who have been discouraged. And it's not Howard Zinn who's discouraging young African American men from trying to get involved in the economy. Howard Zinn is not convincing anybody to rob a convenience store. They don't know who Howard Zinn is. They would not read Howard Zinn. They would get nowhere near it. They can see how America feels about them. They walk around and they get the idea. Where they live, they understand how society values them. They don't need to be taught by any ivory tower professors. And by the way, I noticed that a lot of the names that he drops in part of this grand conspiracy to shame America, it's all Jews. Noam Chomsky, Howard Zinn. Eventually another name comes up, Saul Alinsky, but I'll get to that. All Jews. And I'm Jewish. Wait a minute. I'm starting to see something now. Wait a second. I'll get off that. But that does, in many ways, lead me to the final phase of the movie, where at this point, Dinesh D'Souza forgets his entire point, which is showing how America's great. And suddenly he gets on this weird, paranoid, schizophrenic rant about America's future. Which is like, alright, I understand that's a conclusion you're gonna draw, but he forgets his movie. He starts making another movie. He starts making Obama's America 2, The Rise of Hillary. Yep. Oh, yes, I knew. I was very confused when a man called Saul Alinsky showed up. Because he's just some, like, 1960s organizer. You know, he's kind of socialist, but his whole deal is that, oh, well, I'm gonna start protests. He was very anti-establishment. And he wore some bitchin' glasses. I was very into those glasses. They have a lot of old footage of him, or somebody playing him. I couldn't tell which, because it was actually extremely clear footage. Now I think about it. So maybe it was somebody just playing Saul Alinsky. I don't know. But anyway, I'm wondering, they keep telling this life story and this guy and his plans to, overthrow the government or something. Like, and then finally, I'm like, why are we focused on this guy? Who is he? Why is he important? Who is Saul Alinsky? Even I don't know who Saul Alinsky is. It doesn't matter who Saul Alinsky is. Then finally, we cut over to a little girl with brown hair skipping down the street. And I immediately am like, oh, got it. It's Hillary. Oh, I see. That makes sense now. And, alright, so Hillary is the grand antichrist who's going to destroy America. And this is where the big rants come against, oh, well, America, we're spying on our people, and there's evil governments going, and they're going to put you in jail. You commit 3 felonies every day with them spying on you. And all this links back, by the way, because Dinesh D'Souza in 2012 went and committed some very bad campaign finance law violations, and he was actually, I don't know what happened to him. I think he went to court and he was fined very deeply. But he's like, weirdly, and I was expecting him to be defiant about it. It's like, this is how the government spies on us, and this is where we're going. But no, he's like, oh, I accept I did something wrong. And it's like, bravo, sir. You know, yeah, why not? Go and, go and not be that crazy. Go and accept that you did something wrong. But on the other hand, he kind of brushes it off. It's like, yeah, I did something wrong, but they're the real bad guys. We gotta get them, the liberals. So, in 2016, vote Republican. He doesn't say that, but why not? Vote for whoever they're going to run. And, they're gonna win. Just so you know. Republicans in 2016, there's no way in hell that after 2 terms of a relatively mediocre Democratic president, that the Republicans aren't going to win in 2016, unless they run another Mitt Romney. Because 2012 was their election to lose, let's be honest. Obama didn't really set the world on fire in his first 4 years. So, if they had run somebody with charisma, who actually had plans, who actually could say something, because that's the problem with the Republicans right now. They don't really have plans. It's just like, we're just against Obama. It's kind of where the Democrats were in 2006. It's like, we don't really have any ideas. This is John Kerry. John Kerry was one of those. I don't really represent anything. I'm just anti-Bush. And that's why John Kerry lost. John Kerry sucks. He's going to make a better Secretary of State, I hope, than he was as a Democratic president nominee. George McGovern of the 2000s. Way to go. So I guess that's the entire movie. I wound up talking for way longer than I planned to, and this got like way more political than it should have. This is, I try to be more entertainment and fun related, and at some point, this was a very political movie, and it's something I actually debated whether or not I should have covered it at all. Because on one hand, it is a movie, and it was in theaters, and it was playing in the very same theater. Actually, I saw this right after I saw Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. And so I'm like, alright, it's still fair game, because I'm trying to move away from politics and that sort of thing. I like it, but I don't really want to write about it, because there's so much bullshit. You don't really want to get involved. It's too depressing, really, because I get the sense I get the sense I'm on the losing side, at least. Right now. That's my intention. And right now, the predictions are 2012, Republicans are going to take the Senate, and after that, Obama's done for the next 2 years. And then in 2016, Republicans, they gotta win. And you know what? I hope that they run somebody good. Maybe Christie will do a good job. And doesn't shut down bridges to get political points. But yeah, in New Jersey, we haven't forgotten that. We're New Jersey, and we haven't forgotten Bridgegate. So, anyway, I guess that's the whole deal. There are more right-wing movies coming out. Actually, right now, there is a very bad looking, like, political thriller where a pastor is going to be forced by an evil democratic government to go and give up his faith, which I don't really want to. And you know what? There was a trailer for Atlas Shrugged Part 3. I think I gotta see the Atlas Shrugged trilogy. I think that's something, that may not be next, but that's gonna happen. I read the books. I read the book. Books. I always assume it's a series now, because that's how everything gets adapted. I think we gotta watch the Atlas Shrugged movies, because, that book, as misguided as it still was revolutionary, and it still has its place in history. But these kind of sad, low-budget movies trying to, like, follow in its footsteps, that's something you gotta experience. So we'll be seeing that. Anyway, next thing that's gonna be written up will be something more legitimate. There's a stupid horror movie coming out tomorrow. Let's go watch that. As for Dinesh D'Souza, nice try, but yeah. Goodbye.